Vivienne Hale did not cry when the Dowager Duchess pointed at her and told the table to look. They called her the steward's daughter. They called her a girl who had forgotten her place. Someone at the far end of the table, not quietly enough, called her the thing a duke keeps and does not marry. Vivienne kept her hands flat on the white cloth, on either side of a small leather ledger with her father's initials burned into the cover, and she said nothing at all. The room had gone very still. 12 people, and not one of them moved. A footman near the sideboard stopped pouring wine midstream, and simply watched the crystal fill past the mark. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Then the Duke of Rothbury, who had not risen from his chair in the 3 years since his brother's funeral for anything short of the king, rose from his chair. That was where it began. Wiltshire, in the autumn of 1815, at Rothbury Hall, on the 2nd Tuesday of October, at 7 minutes past 8 in the evening. If a story like hers is the kind that keeps you watching until the end, subscribe to the channel now, so you don't lose her along the way. 3 months earlier, none of this had seemed possible. Vivienne Hale copied deeds for a living. She sat at a high stool in Mr. Aldous Finch's office on Cross Lane, 6 days a week, and she wrote other people's business in a hand steadier than most men's. She was 24. She had been doing this work, in one form or another, since she was 14, when her father had first let her balance a column of figures because her hand was neater than his and her patience was longer. Her father was dead 3 years now. Thomas Hale had kept the accounts at Rothbury Hall for 2 decades, and in his last year he had come home every night with a headache behind his eyes, saying the numbers did not line up, and no one at the hall would let him find out why. He died in April, with a set of unreconciled ledgers still open on his desk. Vivienne had not been permitted to see them since. She did not speak of it. She copied deeds. She counted the days the way her father had taught her to count everything, because a number held steady when nothing else did. Mr. Finch called her into his private office on a wet Thursday morning, and standing at the window, uninvited, was a man she did not know. He was tall, dressed with no ornament at all, and he was looking at the street rather than at her. "Miss Hale," Finch said. "This is His Grace, the Duke of Rothbury." She did not curtsy too low. She inclined her head exactly as far as the room required. "No farther. I am told your father kept the Rothbury accounts," the Duke said, still facing the window. "He did, Your Grace. I am told he was accurate to the shilling. He was accurate to the penny." The Duke turned then. His eyes went over her once, quick and assessing, the way a man looks at a fence line to see if it will hold. Not the way men usually looked at her at all. "I have a lease renewal I do not understand," he said. "Mister, Finch says you might." She did understand it. It took her 11 minutes. The lease was for 240 acres at Marlow Bottom, renewed that spring at the same rent as the year before, though the acreage recorded had somehow grown by 19 acres nobody could account for on any map. Vivienne set the papers down and folded her hands. "The rent should be higher," she said, "or the acreage should be smaller. One of the 2 numbers is a lie." Finch went pale. The Duke did not. "Which number," he said, "do you think it is?" "The acreage. 19 acres of good pasture do not simply appear on a farm. Someone added them on paper to justify a rent that was never raised, and pocketed the difference some other way. I would want to see the survey it was drawn from." The Duke looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face did not move, and something behind it did. "Come to Rothbury Hall on Monday," he said. "Bring your father's habits." I find I have very few people left who tell me the truth about numbers. She did not ask why he did not simply ask his own land agent. She already suspected the answer. His name was Julian Marsh, and he had been Duke of Rothbury for 3 years, since a bridge on the eastern boundary of the estate had given way beneath his older brother's carriage in a spring flood. He had been a second son with no expectation of the title and no love for ledgers, sent to manage a distant cousin's smaller property in Kent, and he had come home to Wiltshire to bury Henry and never quite left the churchyard behind him. He carried his brother's watch in his waistcoat pocket. It had stopped at 11 minutes past 4, the hour the bridge went, and he had never had it mended. He was not cold. He was tired. There is a difference, and almost no one at Rothbury Hall had bothered to learn it. His land agent, Mr. Silas Crane, had managed the estate for 11 years, first under Henry and then under Julian, and he had a way of arriving in a room a half-second after anything important had already been said. He was polite. He was thorough on the surface. He visited the estate office very late at night, when he believed no one watched the lit window from the drive. Vivienne noticed the window her first week at the Hall. She did not mention it to anyone. She simply began, quietly, to keep her own copies of what she read. The irony sat plainly in front of everyone at Rothbury Hall, and nobody but Vivienne and the audience of her own life could see it yet. The numbers her father died still trying to reconcile were the same numbers Julian Marsh had just, without knowing it, handed back into her care. "These are the terms," Julian said, the following Monday, across the estate office desk. "A wage, paid weekly. Your own room in the east wing, away from the family rooms, with a lock on the door. You review what I give you and tell me the truth of it. Nothing more is asked of you, and nothing more should be assumed. Nothing more will be given," Vivienne said. He almost smiled. It did not quite arrive, but something in the set of his mouth loosened by a fraction, and she filed the sight away the way she filed a suspicious number, worth watching, not yet worth trusting. She opened her father's old ledger, the one she had kept for herself all these years, though it held no household's business but her own small savings, and set it beside the estate's newest book, and began. Neither of them said the word fraud yet, but she had already begun, in the private column of her mind, to count. The first real proof came on a Wednesday, 9 days into her work at the Hall, over a stack of tenant leases from the southern farms. "Here," Vivienne said, sliding a paper across the desk. "Compare the survey of 1809 to this renewal. The acreage for Hollis Farm has grown by 11 acres in 6 years. No new land was purchased, no boundary was moved. I checked the parish map myself yesterday. Julian studied it a long moment. 11 acres of nothing, 11 acres of rent that should have been collected and was not. At the going rate for that soil, that is perhaps £40 a year, quietly disappearing since before you inherited. Crane manages those leases. I did not say his name. You did not need to." He set the paper down with a precision that told her exactly how carefully he was holding himself still. "Continue." She continued. Over the following weeks, she found the same pattern in 3 more leases, a few acres added here, a repair cost inflated there, a supplier's invoice for fencing wire padded by what she calculated, working the numbers twice to be sure, at just over 8% above the going county rate. Small enough to escape a glance, not small enough to escape a woman who had been taught to read a column of figures the way other people read faces. She did not accuse anyone aloud. She built a second ledger instead, in her own hand, dated and cross-referenced, copies of every discrepancy she found, kept in a locked drawer she alone had the key to. Her father had taught her that too. Numbers that lived only in one book could be burned. Numbers that lived in two survived. The household noticed her before she meant them to be noticed. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, watched her for a full fortnight with open suspicion before she said a single word beyond what duty required. "You eat in your room, Mrs., Pemberton said one evening, setting down a tray herself instead of sending a maid. "I did not think it my place to eat with the family. It isn't. And it isn't your place to eat alone like a prisoner either." The older woman studied her, arms crossed. "Your father was a decent man, better than most who've held that desk before or since. You knew him. I poured his tea for 11 years. He never once left a bill unpaid nor a farthing unaccounted." A pause. He'd have liked to see someone finally reading those books properly again. It was the first kindness anyone at Rothbury Hall had offered her outright, and Vivienne found she had to look down at her hands for a moment before she trusted her voice. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me. Eat your supper, and hold your head up in this house. Nobody in it has earned the right to make you lower it." Julian began, without quite announcing it, to want her opinion on more than ledgers. He asked what she thought of a proposed drainage scheme for the low fields. He asked, once almost against his own will, whether she thought a man could run an estate honestly and still be called weak for asking a clerk's daughter to check his own agent's work. "I think a man who asks the question is already stronger than one who never thinks to," she said. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in Finch's office, the fence-line look, except this time something in it had gone warmer. "My mother will come from London before winter," he said, apropos of nothing. "She keeps her own opinions about who belongs in this house." "I am not in this house to be approved of, Your Grace. I am here to balance your books. I am aware." The almost smile again, closer to the surface this time. "It is, I confess, a novel experience, being told plainly what I am not owed. You are owed the truth about your own estate. I intend to give you exactly that, and nothing else." She meant it as a boundary. She did not yet know how close she was standing to the centre of his life. By the 5th week, Julian offered to double her wage and settle a small annuity on her besides, framed as gratitude for what she had already uncovered. Vivienne set down her pen very deliberately. "No," she said. "You have saved this estate several £100 already, by conservative count. I have done the work you paid me an honest wage to do. I did not come here to be given money for existing near you, Your Grace. I am not a rescue. I am not a charity case. I am a woman doing a job I am good at, and I would like to be paid exactly what that job is worth. No more." He was quiet long enough that she thought she had offended him. "My brother would have liked you," he said instead. "He never trusted a gift either. Said a debt you didn't ask for was still a debt. It was the first time he had spoken of Henry to her directly." She did not press him, she only nodded, and let the silence hold what it needed to hold, and went back to the ledger between them. That night, walking the upper corridor toward her room, she passed the estate office and saw the lamp still lit at an hour when Crane, not Julian, usually worked alone. Through the gap in the door she saw him standing very still over an open drawer that was not his own. She said nothing. She only noted the hour, the date, and the fact of it, in the private ledger only she could open. There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a room built for 12, when a dowager duchess stands in the doorway and does not yet speak. Vivienne had felt it before, in memory, from the moment 3 months forward she did not yet know was coming. Tonight it had not arrived. But something in the house had begun, quietly, to tighten, like weather felt on the skin before a single cloud shows itself over the hills. Augusta, Dowager Duchess of Rothbury, arrived at Rothbury Hall on a Tuesday in October, a full week earlier than her son expected her, with a letter from her sister in her reticule that named a young woman living under his roof, and a phrase she had not been able to put down since reading it. Kept, the letter said, like a mistress is kept. She did not send word ahead from the last posting in. She wanted, she told her maid, to see for herself. She arrived at 8 in the evening, in the middle of a dinner she had not been expected to attend, dust still on her travelling cloak, and found her son at the head of the table with an unfamiliar young woman seated in the chair to his immediate right. The chair that had stood empty at every meal in that house since the day, 26 years before, that Augusta herself had first sat in it as a bride. Nobody had told Vivienne what that chair meant. Julian had simply waved her into it 2 hours earlier, mid-sentence, still explaining a discrepancy in the Marlow Bottom accounts he wanted settled before he signed papers for tomorrow's tenant hearing. His mind entirely on the ledger open between their plates, and not at all on where he had put her. "Get up," the Dowager Duchess said. Her voice cut through the room like a dropped glass. Vivienne did not move at first, not from defiance, but because for 1 full second she genuinely did not understand what she had done. "Get up," Augusta said again, louder, already crossing the room. "That is not your place. Whoever you are, whatever my son has told you, you do not sit in that chair. Not in my house, not while I am alive to stop it." The table had gone entirely still. The vicar's wife looked down at her plate. Julian's cousin, Edmund Marsh, seated further down, made no move to help, and something in his stillness looked almost pleased. A footman near the sideboard had stopped pouring wine midstream, watching the crystal fill past the mark, and did not correct it. Vivienne set her hands flat on the white cloth, on either side of her father's ledger, and rose. She did not cry. She did not apologize. She stood very straight, and she said, in a voice pitched to carry the length of the table and no further, "I am not seated here to be your son's mistress, your grace. I am seated here because he asked me to review the Marlow Bottom lease before he signs a false one tomorrow morning. My name is Vivienne Hale. My father kept these accounts for 20 years honestly, until the day he died still trying to. I have found what he could not finish finding." The Dowager Duchess opened her mouth to answer. Julian Marsh rose from his own chair for the first time in 3 years for anything short of the king, and put himself, quietly, between his mother and the ledger on the table, and said, "She is right, and I asked her to sit there. If anyone in this house is owed an apology tonight, Mother, it is not me." That was where it began. Wiltshire, in the autumn of 1815, at Rothbury Hall, on the 2nd Tuesday of October, at 7 minutes past 8 in the evening. The Dowager Duchess did not apologise that night. She was not a woman who apologised easily, and 3 months of London gossip had done its work on her before she had ever set foot in the hall. But she did, after a long silence, sit down, and she did not order Vivienne from the chair a second time. "Explain the lease," Julian said, still standing, his voice steady though his knuckles were white on the back of his chair. "All of it. From the beginning. My mother should hear it as plainly as I did." Vivienne looked at the ledger, not at the room. Marlow Bottom's acreage has grown by 19 acres on paper since the year before you inherited, Your Grace. Though no land changed hands and no boundary moved, I found the same pattern, smaller each time, on 4 other tenancies since. She turned one page. I believe I know who. I do not yet have proof enough to say his name in this room. I intend to have it within the fortnight. You would accuse a man in my employ of theft, Augusta said, though some of the fire had gone out of it. On the word of a girl who copies deeds for a living. I would accuse no one on a word, Your Grace. I accuse on numbers. Numbers do not care whose employ a man is in. Silence again, but a different shape of it now. Not shame. Something closer to a room recalculating. The vicar's wife, of all people, spoke first. My husband has said for 2 years the tenant road past Hollis Farm has never been mended, though the estate is billed for its upkeep every Michaelmas. 8% above the county rate for the same work elsewhere, Vivienne said. I have the figures upstairs. Edmund Marsh laughed, a short, unpleasant sound. How thoroughly you've made yourself indispensable, Miss Hale. I have made myself accurate, Missa, Marsh. Indispensable was never my aim. Julian looked down the table at his mother. She has saved this estate several £100 in 9 weeks, and very likely saved it far more than that, in what she has not yet finished proving. She sat in that chair because I put her there, thinking of nothing but the ledger between us. If you have a quarrel with that, mother, have it with me. Augusta studied her son for a long moment, really studied him, Vivienne thought, for what might have been the first time in 3 years, seeing something in his face she had not expected to find there. We will speak of this privately, the Dowager said at last, to him, not to Vivienne. It was not an apology. It was, Vivienne understood, the very beginning of one, the first grudging turn of a wheel that would take a long while yet to come fully round. Dinner did not resume in any ordinary sense. But no one asked Vivienne to leave the table again, and when the plates were finally cleared, Mrs. Pemberton caught her in the corridor and pressed her hand once, hard, and said only, "Well, finally," before walking on, which from Mrs. Pemberton was very nearly an embrace. Later, well past midnight, Julian found Vivienne still in the estate office, the ledger open before her by candlelight. "You did not have to defend yourself so thoroughly," he said. "I would have done it for you. I know. She did not look up. I did it because it was true, not because I needed you to say it first." He sat across from her, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. He drew his brother's stopped watch from his waistcoat pocket, turned it over once in his fingers, an old habit she had noticed and never asked about. 11 minutes past 4, he said finally, as though answering a question she hadn't asked. That's when the bridge went. My brother's carriage. He set the watch on the desk between them, face up, the hands still. The county surveyor said the timbers had been rotted through for at least 2 years. The repair funds for that bridge were approved and dispersed the winter before. I have never once looked closely at where that money actually went. Vivienne went very still. "I think you should," she said quietly. "I think I already have a suspicion where I'll find it." He did not answer. But he did not take the watch back. Either he left it there, between them, on top of the ledger, as though some part of him had decided, without quite saying so, that the truth he had been avoiding for 3 years belonged in the same book as all the others. The bridge fund took Vivienne 6 days to trace, working nights after her ordinary hours were done. Cross-referencing the estate's disbursement book against the parish poor rate records, the timber merchant's receipts, and the piece that finally closed the circle. A builder's invoice in Devizes that did not match any invoice filed at the hall. £412, she told Julian, laying the papers out by lamplight. Approved for bridge timber and stonework in the winter of 1811. Only £190 worth of materials was ever actually delivered, according to the merchant's own books, which I obtained through Mr. Finch under a pretext I would rather not repeat to your mother. The difference, £222, was never accounted for anywhere I can find. Julian did not speak for a long moment. He picked up his brother's watch from where it still sat on the desk and held it without opening the case. Crane signed the disbursement, he said. It was not a question. Crane signed the disbursement, and the survey that came after the bridge failed, blaming rot and weather rather than any want of proper stone, was drawn up by a surveyor who, I have since learned, is Crane's own wife's cousin. Say it plainly. I believe Mr. Crane took money meant to keep that bridge standing, Your Grace, and I believe your brother died because of it. He set the watch down very carefully, as if it might shatter. I am not going to shout, he said, mostly to himself. I promised myself, the day I inherited this house, that I would not become the kind of man who shouts at people who cannot shout back. You are allowed to grieve without shouting. Is that what this is? I think it has been for 3 years. I think you have simply been doing it very quietly, in a house that never once asked you to stop. He looked at her then in a way that had nothing to do with ledgers at all, and something in his face, not the almost smile this time, something steadier, something that had clearly been building for weeks without either of them naming it, made her look down at the numbers between them instead, because she was not yet ready for what she saw. We will need more than the invoices, she said. We will need Crane's own hand somewhere, admitting or at least implying what he did. Men like this rarely leave a full confession lying about, but they often leave a smaller one, thinking no one is looking closely enough to find it. Find it, Julian said, whatever it costs. I will bear the cost. I did not ask you to bear anything, Your Grace. I only intend to find the truth. What you do with it afterward is your own to carry. He almost said something more. She watched him decide not to, watched the words gather and then fold themselves quietly away, the way she imagined he had been folding words away for 3 years running. It was not yet time. They both understood that, without either of them saying it, and the not saying sat between them, warmer than silence usually was. Silas Crane requested a private audience with the Dowager Duchess 4 days later, and word of it reached Vivienne within the hour, because Mrs. Pemberton had made it her business, since the night of the dinner, to know everything that happened under that roof before it happened twice. He asked her alone, Mrs. Pemberton said, low, in the corridor outside the estate office. No footman present. That's not like him. Crane likes an audience when he's charming someone. He only wants privacy when he's frightened. Vivienne felt the first cold edge of it settle in her stomach. She had, over the past week, been quietly compiling everything, the invoices, the surveyor's letter, the pattern of overstated acreage across 5 separate leases, and, most damning of all, a builder's ledger page from Devizes on which Crane's own initials appeared beside a sum that did not match a single figure recorded at Rothbury Hall. She had made 3 copies of everything, as her father had taught her, and hidden 2 of them in places even Julian did not know. She did not yet know she would need all 3. Crane emerged from his audience with the Dowager an hour later, composed, almost pleasant, and did not so much as glance at Vivienne, where she stood at the far end of the gallery. That, more than anything, told her something had shifted. The blow came 2 mornings later, delivered by the county solicitor's clerk to the front door of Rothbury Hall, in a sealed letter addressed to Julian personally. Vivienne watched him read it in the estate office, watched the colour leave his face by careful degrees. "What is it?" she said. He turned the letter around and set it in front of her without a word. It was a formal complaint lodged by Silas Crane before a county magistrate, alleging that the late Thomas Hale had, in his final years managing the Rothbury accounts, systematically falsified entries and diverted estate funds to his own use, funds, the complaint specified, in amounts strikingly close to the very sums Vivienne herself had traced to Crane. Attached to the complaint were 3 pages of ledger entries in a hand made to resemble her father's, dated to years before his death, documenting supposed thefts he had never committed, and beneath that, a second sheet, a sworn statement alleging that Vivienne Hale had, since arriving at Rothbury Hall, altered estate documents to conceal her father's crimes and protect her own inheritance of his reputation, a claim that, if believed, would see her not only dismissed, but very possibly brought before the same magistrate herself. "He has moved first," Vivienne said quietly. "He knew we were close. He did not wait to be found. He built a story where the thief was already dead and could not defend himself, and where I am not the one who caught him, but the one finishing what he started. No one who has spent an hour with you would believe this. Your mother has spent 3 months believing worse, unless—" Julian's jaw tightened. She does not believe it now. She has not been asked to yet, publicly, under oath, with a false ledger in her hands built to look exactly like my father's own hand. Vivienne set the papers down very carefully, though her fingers were not quite steady. "This will go before the county bench. Mr. Finch will represent the estate's interest, and Crane knows it, and Crane also knows that a dead man's reputation is easier to bury a second time than a living woman's is to save. I will not let it stand. You cannot simply forbid it to stand, Your Grace. It is filed. It must be answered. The only question that matters now is whether I can answer it with something stronger than his lie." She looked up at him, and for the first time since she had come to Rothbury Hall, he saw something close to fear cross her face, quickly mastered, quickly put away. "If I cannot, my father's name is ruined a second time, and so is mine, and no amount of what has grown between us in this room will be enough to stop it." Neither of them said aloud what had grown between them in that room. There was no time left to say it. There was only the letter on the desk, and the date set beneath the magistrate's seal for the hearing, 11 days away, and the cold certainty, settling over both of them like weather before a storm finally breaks, that whatever came next would decide far more than a column of figures. The hearing was held in the assembly room above the Ashford Wells Corn Exchange, the only chamber in the county large enough to hold everyone who wanted to see it, and by the appointed hour there was nowhere left to stand. Mr. Aldous Finch sat at the estate's table with Vivienne beside him, her father's ledger and her own copied evidence stacked in careful order in front of her. Across the aisle, Silas Crane sat with a hired attorney from Devizes, composed, well-dressed, his forged pages already laid before the circuit magistrate, a spare, ink-stained man named Josiah Redfern, who had ridden 2 days to hear the case, and clearly intended to hear all of it before he spoke a single word of judgment. Julian sat in the second row, not at the estate's table, because Vivienne had asked him not to. If I win this on my own evidence, she had told him the night before, no one in that room will ever again say I won it because a duke stood behind me. I need to win it because I am right. He had not liked it. He had agreed to it anyway, and that, she thought, watching him now from across the crowded room, said more about him than anything he might have said aloud. Crane's attorney opened by reading the forged ledger pages into the record, 3 entries in a careful imitation of Thomas Hale's hand, dated some 6 years before his death, each recording a withdrawal for personal use disguised as a repair expense. "My father's hand," Vivienne said, when it was her turn, slanted to the left. "Mr. Redfern, on account of an injury to his right wrist he took as a young man, breaking a fall from a hayloft. Every genuine entry he ever made in 20 years of service slants left. Every entry on these 3 pages slants right." She laid her father's true ledger beside the forged one, open to the same year. "I would ask the court to look at both, side by side, in the same light." Redfern did look, for a long, silent minute, holding both books close to the window. "Go on," he said. "The paper itself is wrong besides. My father's ledgers were bound in Bristol, on stock with a particular watermark, which I can show the court in every genuine page from that year." She turned to the relevant pages. "These 3 forged sheets carry no watermark at all, because they were written recently, on paper cut to resemble the size of the original book, and inserted after the fact. I would ask the court's clerk to examine the binding stitches. 3 pages in this section were resewn. The thread does not match the rest of the volume." A murmur went through the room. Redfern examined the binding himself, turning the book slowly. "And the funds? Miss Crane alleges your father diverted," Redfern said. "Can you account for where they actually went?" "I can, sir." Vivienne laid out the bridge fund papers next, the devise's invoice, the surveyor's letter, the pattern across 5 tenant leases, each document numbered and cross-referenced to the last. £412 approved for repair of the Eastern Bridge in the winter of 1811. £190 of materials actually delivered by the timber merchant's own books, which I obtained under oath from the merchant himself, who is present today, and will confirm it. She did not look at Crane. The difference was dispersed against Mr. Crane's own signature. The survey blaming the bridge's failure on rot rather than want of proper stone was drawn up by a surveyor who is Mr. Crane's wife's cousin, and who has since, under questioning by Mr. Finch, admitted he never inspected the bridge at all. The timber merchant, called forward, confirmed every figure without hesitation. The surveyor, seated near the back, did not meet anyone's eyes, and did not deny it when Redfern addressed him directly. Crane's composure held a moment longer than his attorney's did. "This is a fortune-teller's arithmetic," Crane said, rising without leave. "A girl playing at scholarship because her father left her nothing else." "He left me the truth, Mr. Crane," Vivienne said, quiet and level, kept in a hand that slants the correct direction, on paper that carries the correct mark, adding to sums that account for every shilling that passed through his care for 20 years. "I would ask the court to compare that record to yours." Redfern set down the papers at last, and looked at Crane for a long moment. "I have managed accounts for the county bench for 11 years, he said. "I have rarely seen a case argued this cleanly, by anyone, let alone by a clerk. Mr. Crane, you may withdraw your complaint against Thomas Hale and his daughter now, and we will discuss terms of restitution to the estate and to Hollis Farm's tenants privately, or you may continue to press it, and I will refer the whole of this record, including the forged ledger pages, to the assizes for a criminal charge. The choice is yours, and I would not take long deciding. Crane did not take long. He sat down heavily, and when he spoke again his voice had lost every trace of its earlier polish. "I will withdraw it," he said. "I will make restitution as the court sees fit." A pause, and something in his face, for just a moment, looked almost relieved to stop pretending. "I never meant for the bridge. I did not think the timbers would fail so soon. I told myself I would replace the funds before anyone needed them." "You did not," Vivienne said, not unkindly, "and a man died who did not need to." Crane said nothing more. He was led out a quarter-hour later to arrange the terms of his departure from the county, his name struck from every account at Rothbury Hall by nightfall, and though the room around her erupted into the low roar of a crowd finally permitted to talk, Vivienne found she felt no triumph in it at all, only a great, quiet stillness, the kind that comes after a long-held breath is finally let go. Julian crossed the room to her before the crowd had even fully cleared, and did not seem to care who watched him do it. "You did that without me," he said. "I did it with my father," she said. "You only gave me the room to do it in." The Dowager Duchess found her an hour later outside the Corn Exchange, in the thin autumn sunlight, standing somewhat apart from the crowd still murmuring over what it had witnessed. Augusta did not begin with an apology. She was not, as Vivienne had already learned, a woman who found that easy. "You could have let my son's name carry that hearing for you," Augusta said instead. "Most women would have. I did not want it carried. I wanted it settled." Yes, the Dowager studied her for a long moment, the same measuring look her son so often wore, though harder around the edges, worn smooth only very recently. "I said a cruel thing to you at my own table, Miss Hale, on the word of a letter from a woman who has never once in her life told the truth when a lie was more entertaining. I have known for 11 days now that I was wrong. I find I am still learning how to say so." "You have just said so, Your Grace." Augusta's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, an old, tired echo of the same restraint her son carried. "I imagine you'll want that noted in one of your ledgers." "I keep very good records," Vivienne said, and for the first time in the whole of their acquaintance, the Dowager Duchess of Rothbury laughed, short, surprised, entirely real. That evening, at the hall, with the fires lit against the first true cold of the season, Julian asked the household steward to bring the estate's minute book to the study, and in front of Mrs. Pemberton, in front of his mother, in his own hand, he wrote a formal entry into the permanent record of Rothbury Hall, crediting Vivienne Hale with the discovery and correction of 11 years of fraud, and recommending, in language that would outlast every one of them, that no future account of the estate be kept without a Hale's name attached to it in some capacity, for as long as the dukedom stood. "You did not have to write that," Vivienne said, when the others had gone, and only the two of them remained by the fire. "I wanted it written somewhere that could not be argued with later. In ink. In a book that will outlive both of us." He set down the pen, and for a long moment simply looked at her, the fence-line look gone entirely now, replaced by something that had no need to measure her any more, because it had already found everything it was looking for. "I have not said the thing I have meant to say for some weeks now. You do not have to say it. I want to." He took his brother's stopped watch from his pocket, turned it once in his fingers, and set it down on the mantel instead of returning it to his waistcoat, as though laying something down he had carried long enough. I love you, Vivienne Hale, not for what you found in my ledgers, though I am grateful for that beyond what I can say, for the way you set your hands flat on a table and refuse to be moved by a room that has decided it already knows what you are. I have watched you be underestimated in this house for 3 months, and every single time you were the only person in the room who was right. She did not answer at once. She looked at the watch on the mantel, stopped at 11 minutes past 4, and thought of her father's ledger, and of every column of numbers that had ever eventually balanced. I did not come here to be loved by a duke, she said quietly. I came here to be paid an honest wage for honest work. I know. I am telling you that so you understand I am not choosing this because I need it. I have my own wage. I have my own name. I have proven in front of a magistrate and half this county that I do not require rescuing by anyone. She looked up at him at last. I am choosing this because I want to. That is a different thing. There's a difference, he said, and this time the almost smile arrived in full. The first real one she had ever seen on him, brief and unguarded, and entirely hers. She crossed the small space between them and took his hand, plainly, without ceremony, the way she might close a ledger she had finely balanced. And for a long moment neither of them said anything else at all. His forehead came to rest against hers, and the fire settled. And outside the first frost of the year began, quietly, to whiten the fields he had once nearly lost. 10 years passed the way years do, when a house has finally stopped holding its breath, quickly, and then all at once, when you stop to count them. The Eastern Bridge stood rebuilt in good stone within the first year, wide enough for 2 carts to pass, with a small plaque set into the parapet bearing Henry Marsh's name and nothing more, because Julian had decided, in the end, that his brother deserved to be remembered for the man he was, and not the manner of his dying. Hollis Farm never lost another acre to a false survey. Old Mr. Hollis lived to see his eldest daughter married from that same farmhouse, and swore to anyone who would listen that the crooked road past his gate had never once needed patching since the Duchess herself had started walking it with the estate accounts under her arm. Silas Crane did not return to Wiltshire. He took a clerking post in a Bristol shipping office under close watch, made partial restitution over the better part of a decade, and once, 6 years on, wrote a short and awkward letter to Rothbury Hall, thanking the Duchess for not having pressed the criminal charge she had every right to press. She kept the letter. She did not answer it. Some debts, she had decided, were paid simply by being carried honestly from then on. Augusta, Dowager Duchess of Rothbury, became, in time, the school's fiercest patron, though she would deny to her grave that she had ever doubted the wisdom of it, or of the woman who built it. Because Vivienne did build something. In the 4th year of her marriage, in the old steward's cottage where her father had once kept his own accounts by a single candle, she opened a school for the estate's children, sons and daughters both, and taught them what he had taught her, how to read a column of figures the way other people read faces, how a number could hold steady when nothing else did, how the truth, patiently and carefully kept, always eventually balanced. On the first morning, she set her father's small leather ledger on the schoolroom desk, not locked away this time, not hidden in any drawer, but open, its worn cover facing the room, and told the children it was the first book the school owned. It had once been evidence. It had once been a wound reopened before a magistrate's bench. Now it was simply a beginning, the first entry in a much longer column that was still, all these years later, being written. They called her Duchess of Rothbury in the parish records, and on her son's christening papers. At the school, the tenant children still called her simply Miss Hale, and she never once asked them to stop. That was the whole of it, and it was enough. And, in the end, quietly, without ever needing to be loud about it was everything. She never asked the world to notice her. She only kept the truth carefully enough, for long enough, that the world eventually had no choice but to. If that is the kind of ending you needed today, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next woman who refuses to be moved. Tell me in the comments which moment was the one where you knew Julian finally saw her. The chair at that first dinner, the watch set down on the desk, or the ledger opened in the schoolroom at the end, and tell me what city you're watching from tonight. I want to see how far Vivienne's story travels. Another one is waiting for you very soon.